In this video, I'd like to talk about something called remote procedure calls. Remote procedure calls are exactly what they sound like. Procedure call being a function call and remote meaning not here, not local. The idea of remote procedure calls, especially when it comes to online multiplayer games, is that you can essentially call functions and execute logic on other machines or other clients. So let me draw a quick example. Here I'm going to use a client-server model with two clients connected to a single server. Now, in this scenario, I may have client A on the right and client B here on the left. When client A performs various actions, there are times where it's going to need to notify the server, and it's going to have to notify the other client. This could happen if this was an online first-person shooter and client A just fired a projectile and that it needs to spawn a rocket. Well, the rocket would need to also be instantiated on the client on the left, and it would have to be confirmed by the server, whether or not you have enough ammunition, whether or not the hit detection actually hit the other player, so on and so forth. So by the client A performing some action, logic needs to be executed also here at the server and also here on client B. So client A needs a method in a way in order to send messages to the server and the client to tell them to execute this logic. Well, remote procedure calls are exactly how that works. The server can write individual functions that have functions implemented on it. The clients can have functions implemented on them. And any of the clients or the server itself can sort of request that the other clients or the server execute those functions. Let me give you a quick example in practice. So going with the example I was just talking about client A firing a rocket, and client B would need to spawn that rocket, and then the server would need to perform some logic about it. The way that we'd sort of go about doing that is, first, let's imagine what we would do if we were writing a function that only worked with client A, only worked locally. Well, when I click that fire button, I would probably have some function that looks like this. Spawn projectile, and I'm going to say it takes a vector 3 position, and it could take other things in orientation and facing direction, a speed, or whether or not it's one rocket versus the alternate fire, or so on and so forth. So this function here, spawn projectile, may be in charge of instantiating a network object or doing a handful of other things. Could just be local visuals, could be playing audio. Now, if we were making a local game, when client A presses that button, it would just call this function, spawn projectile, and we'd be done. Instead, using a remote procedure call, what client A could do is it could say, I want to execute this spawn projectile function, but I don't want to just execute it on my machine. I want to execute it here on my machine, and I want to execute it here on client B. I want to have them both execute it. And the way that we would do that is using this method of remote procedure calls. Most networking libraries have some sort of specific methodology or some way to say, I want to call the spawn projectile method on another client. Now, in addition to that, when we're talking about doing remote procedure calls, in addition to being able to call a method on the client in general, we may also want to be able to call methods on individual objects on those clients. So let me get a little more specific with my clients here. Now, if these clients had two players on them, here's player 1 and player 2, right? And remember, these are both connected to the same game. So we have the object 1 here, which is also mirrored here. That's object 1, and object 2 here on the right is object 2 there. And these objects are sort of synchronized with each other. We're both watching and playing the same game. In addition to specifying the clients that we want to execute this code on, typically we can also specify which object we want to execute this code on. So, as an example, the UC network supports this call RPC function, which is part of the client networking library. Now, there's a similar one of these for the server networking library as well, in case you're writing code that only executes here on the server. And the call RPC function essentially takes a couple parameters. The first one is a function name. So we could specify spawn projectile, right? Or whatever other function we want. This function could be take damage, jump, play an audio effect, whatever it may be. The next parameter is going to be who it goes to. And by who it goes to, I mean which of these clients should it go to. And there's a couple different options here. One of the options is other clients. If client A is calling this, that would just mean only client B, because it's other clients. All clients would be client A and client B, both A and B. That's all clients. There's also an option to do server only, where I want to send a message and have a function that's implemented on the server be executed, and I don't need to send a message to client B. This could be the example of I'm purchasing something from an NPC. I'm buying something on the auction house. I'm spending real money using a microtransaction, and I only need to send a message up to the server, and the server can confirm my account and then give me some information back about the item I've purchased. That's it. So that's this next parameter of who it's going to, or which client it's going to. After that, we also need to specify which object. So a lot of networking systems will allow you to specify a specific object. If you specify a specific object ID, here in this case, it's going to look for the function that you are calling to be implemented on that specific game object. So as an example, if I were to say I want to spawn projectiles, and the who is all clients, and the object ID is object ID 1, then it would send this RPC up to the server. The server would then say, well, this needs to go to all clients, so I'm going to send it down to client B and back to client A, right? And then, because you've specified an object ID, we're going to look for this code, look for this function, to be on that specific game object. So this is not only how we can target individual clients, individual machines to run this code, but we can also target individual objects to run this code. Finally, we have the parameters of this function. So we'd want to specify like new vector 3, position 0, 0, 0, or whatever we want to do, right? And this would be the list of parameters that go here into the function that we're passing. So all in all, remote procedure calls gives us this really great way to execute logic on other machines.